Hey guys, so I could talk about the idea of white guilt and things like that for ages, but I just want to touch on one point. I was talking to someone who made the horrible argument that Native Americans didn't really have a culture, and they didn't really have conceptions of property or borders or countries or anything like that, so we did them a favor by bringing it to them. And in response I showed them an image of California where it basically shows how each one of the countries was divided up. And what I mean by countries is basically the area that each indigenous community occupied. And I made the point that Americans will often talk about how America is a big country, and they will seem to imply this is something that should be admired. But it's a big country because they killed off all the diversity that usually leads to smaller countries. Like if, the reason why Hitler's idea of establishing a Greater Germany would have worked is because he would have killed off everyone who wasn't German, or at least forced them out of the country, and therefore would have been able to create a bigger country. And the reason why there are lots of diverse countries in Europe is because people have loads of different nationalities. And that brings me to my point, which is the person said, but if these indigenous communities all form their own countries, that would just be ridiculous. Europe isn't, I'm not sure exactly on the statistics of it, but I'm pretty sure, in fact I'd say almost certainly, Europe is, or has the most countries relative to its land area compared to any continent, because Europe was able to develop, and the different ethnic groups were able to develop. And while of course ethnic groups and cultural allegiances were sidelined in the interest of nationalism, I think most Europeans have got country borders that are more, and representation that is more reflective of their history and their ethnicity than Native Americans and Africans do. Now, I bring this all up because people often say that if you acknowledge the bad things done by white people, you have white guilt. And the thing is, what I find is that the type of people who say that are the type of people who are constantly trying to justify the things white people did. And if you're constantly trying to justify imperialism and things like that, and genocide, then I think you have much more white guilt than I have, because I acknowledge and I accept that white people have destroyed indigenous communities, have completely annihilated the chance of those communities ever being able to get the national determination that they would have been able to achieve if they'd been left alone from the beginning. And there's not really any way we can redress that. We can try to redress it, but we won't be able to. There's no way you can go back and work out how these countries would have developed, and in the case of America, you can't get rid of the millions of Europeans who have displaced the indigenous population. But I accept that, and I don't try and justify it. I acknowledge it was something that was done that was wrong, and the fact that I'm able to just, take that for what it is, shows I have much less guilt than someone who is obsessed with suggesting that this was somehow justified, and that the world is now better off because hundreds of millions, or I shouldn't say hundreds of millions, somewhere in the region of 100 million Native Americans were killed, and God knows how many Africans, and outside of just the sheer number of people who killed, the fact that cultures and economic infrastructure and things like that were annihilated. So yeah, guilt, no, not guilty, you're guilty, and maybe one day you'll grow up and be able to actually face the reality of what has caused the current dynamics in the world.